Okay, so we're recording, and let me just go ahead and share my screen. Can you guys see my screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and you guys can see the diagram, the culture diagram.
Yeah.
All right. So the way this works is I've actually instituted this culture model at about three or four federal agencies now, and so I found it kind of tricky because a lot of senior leaders and executives, they look at culture almost like a report card. And so, I'm trying to tell them, this is really tied to the business or organizational effectiveness. We really want to see if we're doing a good job of giving resources to the workforce so they can do the jobs well. This isn't a report card on leaders to say, hey, are you doing good as a leader? But it's more so tied to the business. And so as I was thinking about this, there are some components within this model that could potentially help you with marketing, because it's going to help do a better job of helping you understand your customer base. But really, this model helps with several disciplines. Being able to assess organizational effectiveness, you can use that across any discipline that you want to use it in. And so the way I did it, when I put this model together, I tied it to a survey. And so what I did was I would launch a series of questions tied to this model. And I did it every 18 months. And I'll explain why I did it every 18 months in a little bit. But launch the survey, look at the questions, and I look at the results, and I would benchmark it against other results of other organizations similar to the organization that's taking the assessment, just so I could benchmark data and kind of have like a way of measuring, results. And so you see how this model has a lot of color in there. So if an
Mhm.
organization does not have a very healthy culture, then you would see less color in the middle of the wheel. So like the blue area would be like less colorful, the red area would be less colorful, so forth and so on. Those organizations that have a full wheel like this one, that means that they're doing a pretty good job of their culture, and they're doing a pretty good job of ensuring that they have the right resources in place for the workforce to do the jobs. And so I'm going to cover this culture model and this culture wheel. And as I'm covering it, I want you to kind of think about the different components of it, and just think about if you had results of a model like this, how do you think this would help you as a business professional for any organization that you're supporting? How would it help you with marketing techniques also? So we'll start with the mission quadrant, the stuff that's in the red. And so each one of these major components, you have adaptability, mission, consistency, and involvement. Each one of those four quadrants, they have subcomponents. So if you look at the mission that's in the red, you have strategic direction, you have goals and objectives, and you have vision. So really, when I'm asking questions related to mission, I want to see if the workforce understands what the strategic direction and intent is. Um, do they understand what the goals and objectives are of the organization? Are those goals and objectives, are they tied to performance management? Um, and lastly, do they understand the vision? Where's the organization trying to go? It's also important to, as you think about culture, culture is really um, ways that an organization or individuals think about problems, how they think about things, how they think about how processes work. So you probably heard that old adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast. Well, if you can't help an organization improve their culture, you will never have a good strategy. Because if you keep thinking about problems the same way, and if you're not able to change the way that you think about things, you're going to keep talking about the same problems over and over again. So that's why culture is so important. Let's look at consistency, the yellow quadrant. So here you have core values. Um, you know, does an organization even have core values? Are they ensuring that those core values are integrated into the daily processes? Um, do they have agreement, customer agreement? Do they all agree on what the customer focus should be? and coordination and integration. That is probably an area where I always see the most difficulty at any organization that I'm working with, because a lot of organizations, their capability teams, they work in silos. They don't do a very good job of cross-talking. Once you can get an organization to cross-talk, then the way they kind of coordinate and integrate processes, it works a whole lot better. Let's move to the green quadrant where we have involvement. So here is where you really talk about engaging your workforce. So you have empowerment. Is key task and work being delegated down to the work to subordinates? Are you really empowering your workforce? Team orientation. Do you have folks kind of operating as teams, or are they operating? I mean, are they operating as individuals, or are they operating as teams? So team orientation is very critical. And then you have capability development. Are you able to kind of look at new requirements, new statutory requirements, new technology, and based off of these new requirements, are you able to build new capabilities to keep up with the change, but for your organization's greater good? So they're kind of those components make up involvement. And then lastly, adaptability, and this is the area where we kind of talk about being able to manage change, creating change. You hear a lot of folks, they use the term change agents. Well, I like to use the term change leaders. You don't want to wait on new requirements to always be pushed down to you. You have to be able to identify areas that really need change. So when I think about creating change, I think about change leadership, and actually transformational leadership. So I have my doctorate degree is in transformational leadership. So for me, it's like a part of my operating DNA to be able to look at a process, look at a system, or look at a policy and assess it for gaps, and then make recommendations to kind of help create change. Customer focus. So if you have a number of capability teams that are responsible for separate processes that kind of feed into a systemic process, you want to make sure that everybody has the same customer focus, because if not, the capability team on the left is going to move a little bit faster than the capability team on the right. So they have to all be working together with the same focus. And that kind of hinges on coordination and integration, what we kind of talked about previously. And then lastly, you have organizational learning. So as you think about lessons learned and best practices, you want to be able to capture all of those things into some type of knowledge management framework, so you can truly develop a system for organizational learning. Because being able to look at past mistakes and successes, that just bodes very well for healthy organizations. So I kind of talked about those 4 quadrants, but if you look at the bottom half of this model, all of those components kind of feed into an internal focus of an organization. The upper half kind of focuses on the external factors. To the far left is flexibility, which makes sense because I talked to you about creating change and adaptability. And then on the far right, you have stability, which makes sense also because, mission statement is not going to change very much. It'll change some over time, but it should stay consistent. Vision should be long-term, so that should be stable. And of course, strategic direction and intent is a part of stability also. So that, my friends, is the culture model that I use to kind of assess organizational effectiveness, and how I ensure that organizations are able to kind of start to think about things a little bit differently. So before I take this model off of the screen, do I have any questions, or does anything that I talked about regarding this model, does it all make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. Actually, I do have a quick question though.
Uh-huh.
So say one sector is overpowering another for whatever reason, like the company is more focused on adaptability over mission. Would the organizational learning ever slide over into the mission side and make that blue as well, or does it just stay consistent with the circle?
No, that's a good question. There are linkages with this model, and I actually have a matrix that actually shows the different linkages. if you have a stronger focus on adaptability, then a lot of times you won't necessarily see. You could see some inconsistencies with mission, but you're probably going to see some changes on the consistency side. So involvement is most certainly linked to the mission side. If you look at the opposite sides of the model, mission is more tied to involvement, adaptability is tied to consistency, and vice versa. But you're right. You can make an argument, Andrew, that there's going to be touch points in various areas across this model, but for simplicity, for the sake of simplicity, the linkages are kind of directly across from each other, if that makes sense.
It does. Thank you.
Rania, you have any questions? Did I lose her? All right, I'm gonna stop sharing for a second because I think I had some other folks that may have, didn't have anybody else that joined. But yeah, folks, that is the wrap up with the culture stuff. Let me ask you two, Rania and Andrew, do you see how this could potentially help with any kind of like marketing or business as a whole, as a business professional?
Yeah, I can for sure. So, especially with being an IT major, we relate everything to Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
Amazon's like the biggest business out there, potentially biggest of all time, and like things they're doing. And I could see every one of those aspects from the circle on Amazon. Then you can see them talk with people then from the drivers to people doing inventory in their warehouse and so forth.
Yeah. And so normally what I do, Andrew, is depending on what the results look like, I help organizations build action plans to close those gaps. So let's just say, for instance, on the, if they have an issue with coordination and integration. So normally what I do is I have these sessions, what I call get sessions, where I teach capability teams to kind of really do like a stakeholder analysis, and I make them sit and they talk about the different products and processes and how those products and processes impacts the team on the left and to the right. And so sometimes they look at that and they say, oh, well, I didn't realize that what I do really impacts this report that you have to run. And when you can get them to start talking about that stuff, then you can start to see coordination and integration improve in an organization. So maybe what I'll do is I'll give you a copy of what I call my canvas that kind of shows the different linkages with the components of the model. And it also gives like almost like a boilerplate template for recommended action plans that you can kind of put in place to kind of help solve some of these problems. Now, it's not going to be the same for every organization. So for example, when I see indicators that empowerment or team orientation is not really working like it should, then that normally to me that kind of points to a breakdown in communication, or maybe leaders aren't giving periodic updates to the team to keep them informed, or there may not even be employee feedback taking place. So normally when I see that kind of stuff, I know there's a breakdown in communication. If I see indicators where scores are low in the mission area, the first thing I'm going to ask is, well, do your employees know what the mission statement is? Do they even know that you even have one? Do they know what your vision statement is? So, there's always going to be some indicators that kind of point to some of those things. And so, being able to do these things on a regular basis just kind of helps make this process a little bit easier. Rania, you have anything?
No, I'm good.
All right. All right, folks. Well, I know this was another short session, but when you have a small group participating, feedback will always be kind of limited. But I appreciate you guys joining, and I'll get a copy of this link sent out to everybody soon.
Thank you so much.
You guys have a great 4th of July weekend, and stay safe.
Thank you, you too. Have a good one.
As well. See you next week.